and gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors episode 499.
Woo!
As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by Viable Human, Chris Saturn.
Justin, what's 499 in Roman numerals?
It's D minus 1.
And how do you do -1 in Roman numerals?
You take an I off.
No,
So if I took the I off the D and flipped it around, it would then be a C. So obviously, it's a C.
No, you put the I before the D.
Look, I didn't.
This is the id episode. We should have done id.
We should have done id. We're so dumb.
Have we done id? I don't
We've
remember.
not done it. I'm writing this down right now because that is a good idea, and I feel like we've missed. Off to a great fucking start, by the way. Fantastic. As far as housekeeping, I don't want to.
Like that you just wrote shit is weird.
I did.
Don't worry, we already started the weird.
There's a lot of goings on in our neck of the world.
True, yeah.
And so we've all been in somewhat of a mood lately.
Yeah, Justin's been killing people left and right.
Oh my God. I admit to none of that. So I just want to put it out there in case the vibe is weird or off. It's it's been January's been a tough month for us so far.
A lot of ants,
collectively.
Swarms of birds.
Yeah, birds. I did have a huge swarm of birds. A bunch
I
of
saw
grackles
that.
in my backyard.
A bunch of grackles, yeah.
My week.
Yes, sir.
I've been playing a little more Cult of the Lamb, which continues to be just like a fun time sink.
Nice.
It's just a cute game to spend some time on, and I'm still thoroughly enjoying that. I also picked up 20XX.
I've played a little bit of that. I prefer to call it 20XDX.
Okay. You could. I would also accept 20.
Yeah.
Also acceptable pronunciation.
Yeah.
As per me. I picked it up because I was looking at. So for people that don't see me on Discord, my handle is always Blue Lander.
Yep.
And has been for forever. And I was trying to find this one screenshot of Blue Lander that for some profile picture somewhere because I'd lost it somewhere, and I found out that he's in 20XX.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, I didn't know that, so I went and bought it because he's in it. It's the first
Yeah.
game he's been in since Guardian Legend.
Really?
As far as I know, I mean, I think he showed up as like a power up or something and something else, didn't he?
I thought he was in a few Compiles games in that era.
Yeah, and I mean, as like a little nod,
cameo
he's,
thing.
from what I understand, he's like a shopkeeper again in this. So
Oh,
it's
neat.
like he's like a character
Nice.
rather than just like, hey, look, it's that sprite we drew one time. And it's pretty fun. It's like Mega Man X by way of roguelite.
Yeah.
And it's a good time.
Yeah,
You know,
I played around with it a little bit. It was fun. I had gotten it confused with a different, also Mega Man inspired game though, which I've already forgotten. So
Mighty Number 9.
no, not that. Definitely not that.
I also went back to Restarted and played all the way through and got the bad ending and the good ending on Tunic.
Nice, love that game.
Which is what a game.
Yeah.
So much fun. So the first time I played it, I was a little upset because they had accessibility modes, but they basically just made you invincible.
Right.
And they have since I played it added reduced difficulty mode.
Nice.
Which makes the game just kind of generally easier. Instead of just because like when I play through games just with full invulnerability, like there's zero challenge and I get kind of bored. Like I want a little bit of challenge. I want something. I don't want to just be like moving pixels around, you know.
I'm fine with no challenge. That's okay with me.
And so I played on reduced difficulty mode, and anytime I hit a wall, like a difficulty wall, I would just flip invulnerability on, pass through that section, and then keep going.
Carry on, yeah.
And it ended up being a really great way to play the game. I ended up really enjoying it. A lot of the puzzles in the game are fucking bullshit. I don't want to spoil too much because there's a lot of really fun things to find. And it's one of those games where like it's one of those games that makes me feel dumb because for people that don't know, Tunic has an in-game manual that is in a language you can't read.
Yep.
And you find the pages of the manual throughout the game, and they basically are a walkthrough for the game.
Right.
And all the information you need is in that manual.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you look anything up about it, everyone will tell you everything you need to solve everything in the game is in that manual.
Correct.
And it is.
It's not very clear.
It definitely exists there, if
Yeah.
you're going to get a team of NASA scientists to analyze every page under a microscope and put it together, sure, it's all there,
Yeah.
but I'm too stupid to figure that
Oh,
out.
that was my favorite part.
So I did end up looking a lot of stuff up. A lot of the stuff also, like, I would see how to do it, but it was such a long puzzle that I was like, I'll just go look it up. I'm not gonna wade through all of this.
Yeah.
But really, just a really fun game, really cute game.
Oh yeah.
Ended up really
my only
enjoying it.
real complaint with Tunic is when you first visit the quarry. Because
Quarry is brutal.
yeah, because you have to get that one item that I'm trying not to spoil in order to prevent it from basically just killing you from being there.
Yeah.
And getting to that is just, oh man, that's rough.
Yeah, that was a section I turned on in vulnerability. I everything in the game, I gave it an attempt once, at least, sometimes more than once. And as soon as I would hit that wall of like, this is bullshit, I'm gonna have to put this down, I'd be like, yeah, I'll just turn on vulnerability and just blast through it. And it was great. What I did find is going into it, like, it's very much a Souls-like game. It's very much like, hey, what if Zelda was a Souls-like and you were a little baby fox? Like, that's basically the thesis of the game, right? But it doesn't have that Souls-like difficulty curve. I found the last half of the game getting it has more of that Zelda difficulty curve where stuff, the puzzles might remain hard, but the combat and stuff kind of gets easier as you get later on in the game. By the end of the game, the combat is like, outside of bosses, kind of a joke. Like, you're not even really you're just blasting through everything. Like, you're not even worried about it. And I appreciated that. I appreciated that it didn't have that Dark Souls like combat curve of like, hey, we're going to find the best ways to continue to make it hard in new and surprising ways.
Yeah, I did appreciate the difficulty curve on it as far as combat goes. There's still a few bosses that I just had to turn on invulnerability because I couldn't do it.
I think there was two bosses, and one was the very final boss, but two bosses that I was like, I absolutely can't do this. All the rest of them, I either did it with reduced difficulty or saw that I could do it, but just didn't feel like toughing it out and just turned on the cheats. And
there's also a ton of really fun sequence breaks in it, which is always one of my favorite things in a game. And so I have enjoyed going back and getting things drastically out of order and getting to areas before you're supposed to, and the game both expects it and accommodates it, and that's really neat. I appreciate that.
If I were to lodge any complaints, it would be this, and I don't know that it's a complaint so much because I think also I'm just bad at it. It's that the overworld, even at the end of the game, I was still very confused about how to get back to certain spots. I'd be like, I know where I need to end up. I can picture it in my head, but I have no fucking idea how to get there. And so I struggled a bit with like having to really like micro analyze the map to get to certain spots because like I'd know where they are, but like I couldn't figure out the path to them.
I didn't have that issue as much. There's like one or two areas specifically that were a little annoying to get to just because they required a convoluted path to get there. But for the most part, I was pretty good at the map by the time I got to the end.
Yeah, really my issues were that the quarry was bullshit, but there's cheats and reduced difficulty, so whatever. There is also the nighttime section, which is I didn't love that, but
I enjoyed the nighttime section. I
didn't.
Fun.
I didn't like it. It was one of those moments where they take your stuff away. I don't want my stuff taken away in a game. Quit taking my things away, games.
But then they give you something really cool at the end.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's true. So did really enjoy Tunic. I was trying to see because I played all the way through it end to end on Steam. It took me 9.1 hours.
That sounds about right.
And I didn't 100% it, but I did get the, in air quotes, good ending. And move on to New Game Plus. So that's where I landed on it. And just a really, really fun game. I had a Fangamer code and I was ordering stuff from Fangamer, so I ordered a Tunic plush as a reward to myself for playing my video game.
I've been staring at that so much. I have almost bought that little Tunic plush many times.
My daughter likes the game a lot. She likes watching it, and then I have the physical on Switch, and so she'll play it sometimes with the cheats on because it's because this is the beauty of accessible games is that when you make your games accessible, more people can access them.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. What a crazy fucking idea.
Who would have thought?
It's nuts.
I do appreciate the physical manual that comes with the physical version of the game.
I've also got the hardcover manual.
Oh, nice.
I'd picked it up like a year ago. It's just been sitting on my shelf. I was like, that's cool. Like I was making a fan gamer order and it was like $15, and I was like, that's cool, and maybe I'll use it one day, and I did.
Nice.
So it ended up being really useful in that regard.
I do like that the in-game map does show where you're located on the map. That's very helpful. Even
it
if
does.
Even
I
if
wish
it doesn't
like,
make any sense.
Flashed or something,
right?
Because sometimes I'll be staring at the map and I'm like, "Where's my little fox icon?" But yeah. Anyway, what have you been playing?
I finished up Ys Memoir, the re-release of Oath and Felghana. It was good. I was trying to knock out all of the achievements on it just because it was a game I enjoy playing, and I figured might as well. And for one of the achievements, you have to finish the game on every difficulty level. And they added a new difficulty level to this release that is Inferno difficulty, which is above Nightmare difficulty. However, it doesn't care if you use New Game Plus, and also they added a fast forward mode. And so I learned that if you just start the game at the level that you finish it at a normal playthrough, even Inferno is really easy. I just kind of walked through the entire game on every difficulty level with minimal issues. And it got to the point where it was taking me about 25 minutes to get from beginning of the game to the end on New Game Plus.
All right.
And it's good. It's still a good game. The trophies are apparently bullshit because I did not intend on playing the game 7 times back to back.
Right.
But otherwise, it's good. It's a good port. It still has that god awful voice acting and the questionably inappropriate script, but it's otherwise fine.
Yeah.
I was having some internet issues, and I thought maybe my router was having an issue, so I decided to try picking up a new router.
Okay.
I got a Wi-Fi 7 router just to see if that would do anything different.
Do any of your devices have Wi-Fi 7?
Yeah, my phone does.
Okay. All right.
And so I set that up, and I was really excited because I opened up the box with the router in it, and there's a physical manual that came with my router, and it was like 80 pages.
Wow.
Oh, this is nice. And I opened it up, and the first page is, scan here to download our app with instructions. And then every other page was a different language of the exact same thing.
Gross.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. It's just so frustrating. And like my previous router, it also locks all of its configuration behind the app. If you just go to the router's IP, you can't do anything. And then I learned that it wasn't even a problem with my router. It was my internet service just cutting out for about 4 minutes every morning at 8:50 a.m.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to return this new router.
I think my next router I get is going to be like an OpenWRT router, like out of the gate, like one that natively supports it, because I can't fucking handle that.
Yeah, might have to be my next choice as well.
Yeah.
But first I have to figure out why my internet goes out for 4 minutes every morning.
It's one engineer at Google that doesn't like that you talk shit about them, and so for 4 minutes every day.
My internet is Frontier.
Okay, it's one engineer at Frontier that is a guerrilla marketer for Google who does it to you.
No, otherwise I've been picking away at FF5 on my Xbox because I picked up the Pixel Remaster a little while back. And still don't love the game. Like, it's a good game, but it's still probably my least favorite of the first 6 games.
Wrong.
Just because it's long and it's slow, and it's a little plotting, and the story is really just a filler. And so it always feels weaker than most of the other first 6. In multiple ways.
Why do you hate me, Saturn?
The job system is fantastic. They got that down, but everything else about the game just feels a little weaker than the others.
Yeah.
But I have appreciated that because it is on that list of games that if you own them on Xbox, you can stream them anywhere. I've been able to stream it on my phone at work for the few minutes that it is slow up there lately.
Yeah,
that's been convenient.
There you go. That's good.
Yeah.
Let's do some news.
Okay.
First up, LRG and Sunsoft are printing a North American NES version of Gimmick for the first time.
which
is exciting.
Yeah,
very
it's
exciting.
good. It'll be LRG prices, so I'm not
Yeah,
like super stoked on it. But
I'd prefer something that like is in stock and you can just buy it as
Right.
long as it's in production, and
yeah.
it's like a product on a shelf and you don't have to like mark calendars or
So-
any of that kind of shit. But
So the open pre-order is like a month and change. So I give them
Yeah.
credit for that. And apparently they're going to carry it at their store, which
Okay.
they have that one
They have
location,
one location,
and wherever it is on the East Coast somewhere.
right?
So if you happen to be there or go to one of their cons, you might be able to buy it in
Yeah.
person.
Well, it's something.
Yeah.
The DOS version of Prince of Persia has been ported to the Dreamcast. Which,
Weird.
All right. Okay.
They did add VMU support, so it has little custom icons when you're playing it, which that's cute.
That's cute. Yeah.
But it's still just the DOS version that looks like the DOS version. It doesn't even
Is
look as
that-
good
is
as the
that the
Sega
sup-
CD version.
I was going to say, is that the superior version of the game?
No, it's just one of the oldest versions. of
It's
the game.
It just exists.
Yeah.
Here you go. Why not? The FTC has fined Genshin Impact developer Cognosphere $20 million and banned them from selling loot boxes to minors 16 and under.
Which is, good, but also
That's all good.
why not do the same thing to every other publisher?
I don't know.
That's
I
my
don't know.
concern.
Like, this is it's one good step
Yeah.
in the correct direction.
Baby step, I'll take it. But
Also, $20 million is a joke amount of money to
Correct.
them. So, like,
It-
maybe fines that actually matter, that are proportionate to the
right,
entity being
$20 million
fined.
might be what they made last month on Genshin Impact.
But good. It's good to see it. I want to
Yeah,
see more of
yeah,
it, and I
baby
want to see it
steps.
applied more widely.
Yeah, I'd like to see
but it's
that
something.
industry wide. That'd be nice.
Yeah. Atari says its new retro-focused strategy is paying off financially. Who knew?
Weird.
That Atari, the company with like 45 years of video game history, could lean on that to
That's
sell
bizarre.
goods and services.
That's almost 50 years.
Almost
more
50
than 50 years of
So it
gaming
just-
history.
That's shocking. Did they tell Sega?
No.
Because Sega said they're not a retro company, and Atari's over here raking in the retro cash. So I
Sega
don't
doesn't
know.
even know how many games they own. Remember? They're just confused.
It's good to know that Sega leadership hasn't improved since 1998.
Right.
It's good to know that, right? It's
Yeah.
the
No,
same fucking boneheaded statements.
Right. I
coming
appreciate
out
that
of
the
Sega.
new Atari management is focusing on their video games and not on, casinos and crypto and whatever other bullshit they had previously thought they were going to be focusing on.
Yeah. Kosam the Great, the modder who recently made a custom Sega Neptune motherboard, is now playing with the idea of recreating the SNES PlayStation or SNES CD. I don't know what it would do. I mean, we have like what, 1.5, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, CD games that.
No, we have 0.
We have 0. I thought we had like.
We have some fan-made ones.
Working. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So it would just play fan games?
Yes. It would be able to play fan games. That's pretty much it. What I would like to see is apparently somebody was saying that they are working on a SNES CD port of Secret of Mana, which was famously originally a Super NES CD game and then cut down to fit on a cartridge.
Yeah.
So I would be curious to see what they can do with that and other such previously canceled Super NES CD games.
Sure.
But even then, it's still just, hacks and fan projects.
Yeah.
Which is neat. But
yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Weird, but cool.
The guy did show image of him getting the Super Disc BIOS to load on a Super Famicom, which is cool.
There you go.
Yeah,
I mean, technologically, this is insanely impressive.
right?
I just am not sure what they're gonna do with it once it's
Right.
done.
Yeah.
Gaming analysts say there's, quote, hope for the industry that GTA 6 could cost $100.
Yeah.
Let me inform some people that maybe don't buy new AAA games. They already cost $100.
Only if you buy the deluxe edition and the
Right.
DLC.
If you buy the loser edition, it's $70. But if you buy the actual version of the game they want you to buy, it's $100. So if it's $100 base, wouldn't that mean that the correct, in air quotes, gold version of GTA 6 is going to be $130 to $150?
Justin, I don't know what decade you're living in, but I'm pretty sure they're $80 now for the loser edition.
What?
Yeah, a lot of games are $79.99.
Games are $80?
We're starting to see that, yeah.
God damn it. Come on.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't work in the games industry. I don't know what the fuck's going on more than anybody else. But maybe if you didn't spend fucking $500 billion on every goddamn video game, you could just not be an ass about how you sell it to us.
Now,
I don't know.
when adjusted for inflation and all that, games aren't as expensive as they have been right now. But still, it is a painful price right now for a lot of games.
It is insane to me that with the forward progress of computers, of standardized APIs and libraries and standardized portable engines, that game development is costing more. I know. Now, I get it. There's the blockbuster games. There's your Calls of Duties and your Grand Theft Autos 6s.
Right.
Sure. Those are definitely... You got voice acting, you've got rigging, you've got animating, all this other stuff, but why is everything else going up when theoretically it should be cheaper now, right?
No.
Just actually making the game part of the game should be. Am I wrong? Am I crazy?
No.
No.
$100.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and the hope that these analysts are talking about is if GTA 6 breaks that barrier and releases as $100 for its standard edition, that means everybody else can follow suit.
Oh, yeah. Ubisoft instantly would be $100.
What I would prefer is that games that cost more to develop maybe cost more.
Sure. I'm talking shit, but I'm sure Grand Theft Auto 6 has a huge amount of voice work and writing and work that went into that. I mean, that one in particular.
We already know that they've spent at least $1 billion on GTA 6.
Yeah.
So I get that.
Totally.
But let's not make every game cost that much. Games that have a smaller budget maybe sell at a smaller price. That would be neat.
It's almost like the price of your finished project should be reflective of the amount of effort and money that went into creating the product.
Wouldn't that be nice?
What a weird thought. Dragon Quest III HD 2D was Japan's only million-selling physical game in 2024.
And that's only if you count both the Switch and PS5 sales. If you count one or the other, then they were both beaten by Super Mario Party Jamboree.
All right. Yep. Can't keep Nintendo down, huh?
No. But that is a worrying sign about the continuing downward trend of physical media.
Yeah, it's not great. No. It's not boding well for this next generation. And as much as I don't love patting Nintendo on the back, they seem to be going full steam ahead on, hey, we were making more cartridges. Yeah. So, it's something.
That's something.
Mister is getting a 3DO core, so now you can all wish you didn't have 3DO.
Well, now they can play Plumbers Don't Wear Neckties.
There you go. There's some good 3DO ports. Some games got real good 3DO ports.
Some games were originally good on 3DO, like Gex.
Yeah. Wasn't Road Rash real good on 3DO?
Yeah, there was a good Road Rash port on 3DO.
Yeah, and then you said Gex, and there's a few. There's a few.
Yeah, the 3DO port the 3DO version of Gex is the original. The others were ports.
Yeah,
so
everyone talks shit about the 3DO for the FMV games, but there's a couple of good ports, good originals.
It definitely has a lot more good games than the CDI did.
Yeah, yep, I will agree with that.
Yeah.
The Apple iOS/macOS port of Capcom's Resident Evil 2 2019 has less than 10,000 paying customers. Other AAA ports to the platform are also struggling to meet sales expectations. It turns out people don't want to play giant cinematic horror experiences on a phone. Well,
it's not just horror, because Assassin's Creed also doing poorly.
Yeah, also not a game I would want to play on a phone.
Well, the thing is, this isn't just phone. These ports are iOS and macOS.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that, how big that slice.
Yeah, me too.
How big of the slice macOS really is. You know what I mean? I don't.
And for the most part, people with macOS have access to Steam.
True.
Granted, I don't know how many Steam games are playable on modern Macs with their ARM-based processors.
Yeah.
But
I'd be curious. We should check. Steam's doing their hardware survey right now. I'd be curious to see how many macOS users are actually on Steam. I suspect it's
even then
pretty small.
It could still be macOS users on Intel Macs.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Absolutely. A rare tabletop Mother 2 game called Slot Brothers has been found, recorded, and made available on Tabletop Simulator.
Yeah.
So cool. I'm sure it's not good, like a lot of old board games, but it's interesting.
Yeah,
so there you go.
It's based on, if you've played Earthbound, Mother 2, it's based on those 3 guys in the desert that will spin around and act like slot machines if you give them a couple dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And,
well, there you go. Balenciaga has made a premium Game Boy-shaped device that only plays Snake. And just Snake.
Yeah.
That's it.
It looks premium.
Enjoy Snake.
Yeah.
Awesome. The developer of the Super Sega, after receiving takedown requests from Sega, has still not issued any refunds and is now claiming that they're dying.
Yeah.
I don't want to laugh at someone who has a serious medical condition, but it just went from like, hey, this is a cool project to Drama City so fast.
Yeah. They claim that they have issued all but a few dozen refunds, and more than a few dozen people have already come forward to say, no, none of us have received our refunds. And
if they are in ill health, I wish them a speedy recovery.
True, yes.
I don't wish any harm coming to them, but wow, what a headline.
So on one hand, they said that they're in the hospital now and they're dying, and that's why they have not been able to issue these refunds. And on the other hand, they also said that they are helping pay for these refunds that should have just been the money that they were paid in the first place, so they should already have it. But they said they're helping pay for these refunds by selling their Lamborghini.
I can't.
So it sounds like financially they're doing okay.
Even.
Yeah.
I can't fucking even, Saturn.
Yeah.
Video Game History Foundation's digital library is available for the first time as of January 30th. If you're on their Patreon, which you should be, you should have got the link today. The website was down immediately for me, so I haven't gotten to look at it. But they have scanned the data of over 1,500 magazines.
Nice.
And for those of you that don't have to go find information in old magazines about the games you cover on your retro gaming podcast, let me tell you, it's really fucking hard and they're badly cataloged. PC Gamer, a little bit of Game Informer and Nintendo Power have databases out there if you want to see like, hey, what issues was this game covered in? But a lot of this stuff is just kind of like a mountain of old school media scanned in via PDF that is extremely hard to navigate.
Yeah.
So this is insanely valuable to the preservation community, as all of the efforts the Video Game History Foundation continue to work toward are. So I want people to recognize how monumental of an effort this is from them. This is huge.
Oh, yeah.
And I suspect there's going to be a lot of bullshit gaming articles coming out of all of the usual places as people rediscover little tidbits of information from this old library that we can now easily access and reference. So I'm very excited to cover it for show stuff. I wish it would have come out for tonight's shows, but it didn't make it in time. Didn't make it. And finally, Arc System Works announced Super Technos World River City and Technos Arcade Classics.
Yes.
Which I guess is going to be on top of their other River City Classics collection?
I believe so. So this one has the arcade version of Super Dodgeball, River City Renegade, the Super NES one, Kunio's Dodgeball Time, Downtown River City Baseball Story, a puzzle game called Kunio's Odin. I don't know how
Tribes, Suguro Quest, Dun Quest, Super Dodgeball, Zane Deslina, China Gate, the Combat Tribes Arcade, and Shadow Force. These are some kind of more obscure games in this space. So my fear was that it was going to be a repeat of their previous Kunio collection. This does seem to be unique titles.
Yeah, it does look like it's different stuff.
Yeah,
and some of them are getting their first ever English translation. So that's good.
Which they've been doing. They did that on the last Kunio collection. There was at least one or two that were for the first time in English. So good on Arc System Works for making those available.
Seriously.
Anyway, which brings us to our topic at hand, which is Fantasy Zone. Saturn, it's Fantasy Zone.
Yay.
Synopsis, what that guy from Space Harrier must have been talking about. Fantasy Zone, First Encounters. This game is very near and dear to my heart. We had the NES version of the game, which is a terrible version of the game.
Yeah.
We remembered it fondly. We played so much of it. It was a Tengen cartridge, and because of that, every Nintendo fucking hated it. And it took 30 minutes to get the goddamn thing working.
Yep.
And so it was our most frustrating cartridge, but God, we played so much Fantasy Zone. And I remember I would look at the awesome cover art and be like, man, this is so cool looking. And it's the worst. It's the worst cover art. But like when I was a kid, it looked cool. And
you had bad taste as a kid.
Last week, I'd been researching everything for the show, and my daughter, I was talking to her about Nintendo. And I don't remember how it came up. She was talking about her Switch, and I said something about Nintendo, and she's like, the Nintendo what? And I'm like, just the Nintendo, the entertainment system. Like, that was... And she was like, that's what you had when you were a kid? And I was like, yeah, you've seen it before. And she didn't remember. So I took it out, and I took out my big box of NES games, and I hooked it up to her CRT, and I go, all right, well, pick a game. And the first game she grabs out is Fantasy Zone.
Because it looks different.
And we spend 15 entire minutes getting the game to fucking run so that she can die and play Leaf 100 times in a row.
Yep.
And it was great. And she was like, it's really hard. And I was like, yes, it is. It does not get easier.
Nope.
And so she ended up playing a different game. But it's man, I played the crap out of it on NES, and for years I had no idea
that there were better versions out there.
That there were better versions, that there were sequels in other games, that it was a Sega game. I had no
well, it says idea. It's a Sega game right on the title screen.
Yeah, well, I didn't read no title screens. I was a kid. I was just playing Fantasy Zone.
Or instruction manuals or boxes.
I'm sure, like, I was like, some things Sega did one time, and then, who the fuck knows? And I didn't realize it was such an entrenched Sega property. Yeah. What about you, Sadie?
I had seen the NES version at the rental store and was like, that looks butt ugly. I'm not playing that. That is an ugly box. Like, the front of the box was so ugly that I didn't bother to look at the back of the box. That's how I felt about Fantasy Zone. Because, God, that is butt ugly. So I didn't get around to playing it until the TurboGrafx version, which also has an ugly box. I'm not going to lie. But at least its ugly box is a little closer to the game as far as being like bright colors and looking more goofy. So that was enough to convince me to give it a shot, and I enjoyed it. I had some fun with it, and I've revisited it plenty of times, but I don't think it has ever been as fond of a memory for me as it is for you.
I think that Fantasy Zone has gotten better over the years for me. In fact, it is a game I enjoy even more now.
Yeah.
Than when I was young. Mostly because there's better ways to enjoy it.
True. Yeah.
Now. But
I do enjoy exploring the entire series, and as far as simpler style shoot 'em ups, it is one of my favorites to return to.
Yeah. Let's talk development of Fantasy Zone. Most of this is from a Shmupulations interview with Yoji Ishii, so it's a lot of stuff he said and referenced, and obviously some of this may or may not be apocryphal as interviews go.
Yeah.
And judging by the tone of the interview, there's a lot of him just kind of being like, yeah, you guys know more about it than I do. So take it all with a grain of salt.
Which also happens a lot with a lot of these retro interviews.
This was designed by Yoji Ishii, who worked on Flicky, Mean Bean, Sonic 3D Blast, a bunch of other stuff for Sega. It was programmed by Shuichi Katagi, who worked on Sonic Adventure and Time Stalkers. Art was by Masaki Kondi, who worked on Outrunners, Galaxy Force 2, Stadium Cross, and it was composed by Hiroshi Kawaguchi, who did music for Space Harrier and Outrun and Hang On and Afterburner and a ton of like super iconic Sega games from that era and later.
By Mean Bean, you mean Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean machine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Puyo.
Yeah, just the Puyo port. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, but I call it Mean Bean because I'm not going to say all that shit.
Because I had no idea what you were referring to, because I was like,
Mean Bean.
What the fuck is a Mean Bean?
Mean Bean.
Never heard anyone refer to it as that. No.
So in this 2014 interview, Yoji Ishii states that Fantasy Zone was originally meant to be a response to the recently then released Gradius. It was a top-down command from Sega that they come out with a Gradius killer. In the entire they felt like their current shmup lineup just wasn't up to snuff. Gradius was crushing it, presumably, and they needed something to compete.
Fair.
So Ishii and his team got to work during development. There was a concerted effort to really meet Gradius on a one-to-one basis, with things even being like, we have to have a laser weapon. But then the laser weapon didn't work right because they were on the System 16 board and they couldn't figure out how to make the laser weapon work. And that's why the laser in Fantasy Zone is a little different than the laser in
the Gradius series.
Gradius.
Yeah.
And if I remember right, the issue was that they couldn't get it to go through stuff because the laser in Gradius just goes through everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it just rips through things.
And in Fantasy Zone, it just hits the thing and then it stops.
Yeah.
Which makes it kind of shitty. The initial visual design was supposed to be more space-like and more like Gradius, but Ishii was worried that the game was just going to feel like a straight-up knockoff, and so he asked for a cheerful presentation. The main character, Opa Opa, was named after the Brazilian phrase upa, which I looked up what it means, and I've forgotten it. And there's also apparently Opa is a phrase in Greece.
Yes.
I don't remember what that means either, but it is specifically...
It is often a celebratory thing.
Was that it?
Yeah, you'll hear it like at weddings and stuff.
It is specifically after the Brazilian phrase upa. Initially it was part of the theme, right? So the whole idea was that the game was going to be like samba music based, and everything was going to be kind of samba themed, and then they dropped all of that and then just kept Opa Opa as the name. Oh, the guy wrote in our private chat, Opa is usually the beginning of sentences. It can mean sorry if you use it after you've bumped into someone, or it can also be a compliment. Thank you, guy. Doing producery things on the show.
Right?
That never happens. Fantasy Zone also adopted the free scrolling of Ishii's previous game, Flicky. A lot of people also compare it to Defender in that regard.
It does feel a lot like Defender.
But Ishii does not name drop Defender, so I don't know. And this was kind of in contrast to a lot of shmups of the era.
Yeah.
Ishii also cites his own lack of skill for why the game requires the destruction of 10 bases before fighting the bosses. And this is a thing he brought up multiple times. According to him, having to destroy the bases gave the players like a concrete, easier goal to achieve where you don't have to kill everything.
Yeah, it's not just get to the end.
Yeah, so you've got something specific you're doing, and if you can avoid combat and shit along the way, then go for it. If you can scroll that guy off the screen, then forget it. He specifically said he wanted it to be similar to something like Pac-Man, where you're not there to eat the ghosts or whatever. You can avoid the ghosts and just eat the dots.
Right.
And then a lot of care was put into the item shop system in the game, which was really unusual for shmups at the time.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the closest thing there would have been probably Gradius, which you could kind of shop.
You expended the little power up points to get a power up, but it still wasn't a shop interface.
Yeah, and Ishii was really into cars, and so he wanted it to be like going to the shop, the mechanic, to the car shop to get your car worked on.
It does always remind me of a lot of those old racing games where you would have your
it feels that way.
Shop at the end of the race, and you'd get to buy a new engine, buy new tires, whatever. And it's always felt very similar.
And I don't know if it's all of them, but a lot of Fantasy Zones and its ports have a little wrench icon when you go into the shop, which kind of like drives home that sort of car shop feeling. And he also was very concerned. He was talking a lot about like finger speed. He was worried that players with slow fingers like him would struggle to enjoy the game, so he included things like the rapid fire 7-way shot and different items and power-ups that would alleviate that, but didn't make the base weapon rapid fire, which seems a little weird to me.
Look, just because he has slow finger syndrome doesn't mean he has sympathy for slow finger syndrome.
Because, guy just responded, "Hey, wow, look, man." So yeah, it was one of those things where he wanted people to be able to play the game. Accessibility was a concern. It's still, spoiler, a really fucking hard game.
Yeah, it is a very hard game.
But yeah.
Not honestly, it is more accessible than a lot of shmups of that era, though.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When compared to a lot of shmups, it is a lot easier, but still pretty tough.
Oh, yeah.
Emphasis was placed on having interesting boss fights. Ishii himself called the game a boss game, Which wasn't an uncommon idea. A lot of times games would come out like Gradius where there weren't really super interesting bosses.
Right.
And then there were other games that you're like, oh, you play this game for the cool screen-filling bosses. That's what's cool about this game. And he does, I wanted to mention, specifically quash the idea that Harrier and Opa Opa had anything to do with one another in the interview, despite both games mentioning the Fantasy Zone.
Yeah.
It was simply a callback. Even the similar aesthetic, according to him, was totally coincidental, which we're going to talk more about at a later time.
Yeah, apparently other people at Sega disagree.
Fantasy Zone would ultimately be Ishii's last time working as a director on an arcade game at Sega. After that, he would move on to a producer role. About 10 years later, he would go on to be a founding member of R-Tune, who are the people that did Blinks and Blue Dragon and a bunch of other stuff.
Oh, yeah. R-Tune's still around.
Are they still around?
I believe so.
Oh, I don't know why I thought they'd shut down. But yeah. He was one of the founding members of R-Tune. So, went on to
I guess they did shut down. That's unfortunate. They're part of Marvelous now.
Oh, yeah. As so many other companies have also become.
Yeah.
Saturn, do you want to talk presentation for us for people that are unfamiliar with Fantasy Zone?
It's cute.
It is cute, yes.
That is all. No.
Excellent. You did.
That was as typical of the System 16 games. The graphics are very bright, very colorful. There's very detailed sprites for its time.
Mm-hmm.
Even comparing it to other, like Gradius, which was a year before, a lot of the sprites have a lot more detail than what you saw in Gradius.
Yeah.
Gradius uses a lot of kind of the illusion drawn by the CRT to make things look more detailed, when really they're just kind of a jumble of pixels, whereas Fantasy Zone has more stylized graphics, but with more detail on them.
Yeah, it's so bright you can't hide anything.
Oh yeah,
it's you see it all. And for people that don't know, the System 16 hardware was gigantic. I mean, it had everything was on it. Wonder Boy, Flicky, Hang On, Alien Syndrome, Altered Beast, it's Alien Storm, Outrun, multiple Outruns, Afterburner. Like it was
their big hardware for a long while there.
Yeah, for I was trying to see how long it was in use, and I think it was in use
5 or 6 years.
Until so here's the problem: is there's System 16 games that were made long after the System 16, which we'll talk more about. But it was like it went on for a long time.
Yeah,
it went for a long time. So it was a big deal.
Yeah, but yeah, so all the enemies are stylized.
I'm sorry, I was wrong on a bunch of those.
Oh,
I was looking at the wrong thing. Outrun was based on System 16, was actually different. And Flicky was the older hardware, so it was Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Fantasy Zone.
Flicky didn't look like a System 16 game.
Not Wonder Boy. I was looking. My columns were mixed up. So correction, minor correction.
Shinobi, Fantasy Zone, Altered Beast, Golden Axe.
There you go. Thank you. That was the list I was looking for.
There you
go. Anyway, yeah. So super bright aesthetic. Super. Ishii called it pop art aesthetic a lot, and I would definitely agree with that. Very dark lines, bright colors.
Yeah.
We talked about it a lot in our very first episode on Cute 'em Ups, for anyone that remembers 499 episodes ago.
Almost 10 years ago.
Everything in the game is like anthropomorphic. There's very, very, very little in the game as far as like enemies and stuff that don't have eyeballs or arms or feet or things. Like
cute little faces on them. And
yeah. Even in the first level, like there's these guys called Mukalons, and they're like weird little Goomba looking dudes with little orange feet. They've also got these like things that look like little flying pliers called Sasangs. And you don't notice it in the game, but when you look at their sprite, they have eyeballs on the little plier bit that like grabs you. So it's all just super, super duper cute.
Yeah.
And
even the little bases that you attack are super cute as well.
Oh yeah. And Kawaguchi's soundtrack might be one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. Yeah, it's super good.
And as far as sticking on presentation, I love how Opa Opa himself grows little feet when he touches the floor.
Oh yeah,
like that's not a necessary thing gameplay wise, but it's just so charming.
let's talk gameplay.
Okay.
For people who have never played Fantasy Zone, it is a side-scrolling, non-forced scrolling, or free scrolling, I guess is the term, the correct term, shmup, in which in each level you are tasked with destroying 10 bases.
Yep.
And
Well, in the arcade version anyway. The home ports
Yeah, in the arcade
sometimes had
version.
to fudge that number.
True. Theoretically, 10 bases.
Yeah.
And I'd seen that they've got names. All of the bases have names. All of the bases have little eyeballs.
Yes.
Some of them have arms and stuff.
They're adorable.
So like in Playleaf, the first level, they're called Dralin Flores. And in like round 3, they're called, what are they called? These were the weird ones that look like flying saucers. The Patatons. Everything has a name in Fantasy Zone. It's all named. The levels are named. Weirdly enough, the bosses, I can't find a lot of definitive information on the names of them. I always assumed, because when you start the level, it says the name of the level.
Yeah.
And so when you start the first level, it says Playleaf. And I assumed that was the name of the boss. So the boss's name is Stumpalon.
Yeah, Stumpalon is the boss of the first stage. So
yeah.
And looks like the second stage is Valanda.
Yes, and I always called him Yolanda because I read it wrong. But I've seen different boss names in different versions of the game, different manuals and stuff.
I'm also seeing different enemy names here, just from what you were describing a moment ago. I'm seeing different names in different sources. So
yeah, so and a lot of this kind of background information and names and stuff gets sort of shook around.
Yeah, I mean, it probably doesn't help that the arcade version couldn't really give all of this information, because it's not like there's a manual that comes with an arcade game.
No.
And the different home ports were sometimes published by different companies, and so there was probably mixed up information over the years.
Yeah. I would say the System 16 versions of both Fantasy Zone and Fantasy Zone 2 are probably the ones to consider the definitive ones as far as like stuff like that. But then also it gets really tricky, right? Because like the System 16 version of the first Fantasy Zone didn't get a manual,
right?
But the Master System version did get a manual, and then later on the System 16 version got a manual on like 3DS, and it changed information from the Master System manual, and it just you get really in the weeds. Let's come back to gameplay.
Okay.
Everything you kill, most things you kill, drop coins.
Yep.
The coins do have gravity. They fall to the ground, and you have to go down to the ground and scoop them up.
Yep.
So a lot of the game is chasing coins.
Yeah.
And possibly the most stressful part of any Fantasy Zone level is after you kill the boss, all their coins fall on the ground, and you have like 2 seconds to grab them all.
Which was a common thing in especially Sega games this time, because you saw that in stuff like Wonder Boy as well.
Yeah. Weird thing to add.
Yeah.
But very stressful.
Yeah.
I always thought it was strange you could buy extra lives in the shop. You'd put it in the notes here, and I thought it was worth mentioning that, like, if you can get the money, you can just buy things in the shop.
Yeah.
Now, anytime you buy something in the shop, that item, the cost of it goes up perpetually for the rest of that playthrough.
Right.
Which is, it kind of creates a situation where, like, unlike Gradius, Fantasy Zone is one of those games where you can't just get the best power-ups and sail through the game.
Right, because your power-ups expire.
Your power-ups are timed.
Yeah.
And if you ever have to reacquire them, you have to pay more money for them, and you may not be able to afford that.
Right.
So the game really seems to want you to have to learn how to get by with your base speed and weapons, which is really tough.
Oh, yeah.
But it also creates a timing situation where you're constantly having to race, right? Like if you buy a 7-way shot in the shop, you are racing to destroy the bases. Yeah. If you can use that on the boss for like 2 seconds, you're golden.
Right. Yeah. You had a good
You'll be
run.
great.
Right.
But otherwise, you're gonna have the basic weapon.
Yeah.
This game also features a boss rush near the end, which was it had happened before this, but was still kind of a newer idea.
Relatively new idea. Yeah. An uncommon idea at that point.
Yeah. At the end of the game, you fight through a boss rush.
I mean, in '86, bosses in general were still a relatively uncommon idea.
True. So you fight through all the same bosses again. You get to fight Yolanda and
her friends.
What's the Stumpalon?
Yeah.
Stumpalon was the other one, and Mockstar and all
Koba
the
Beach.
what's the snowman? He's in Polaria, It's a family of snowmen known as Popopos.
Popos.
Popos.
Yeah.
Popos.
Mr. Popos.
So yeah, you play through the 8 levels. The 8th level in particular is the one with the boss rush, and then you go through and you fight the final enemy.
Yeah.
Which turns out to be Opapa.
Yeah, that's Opa's
which is
Papa.
Opa's father. Yes, who's the leader of the enemy forces.
Yeah. How could he betray us like that?
That's kind of the game.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about
now,
ports.
I do want to mention real quick, though.
Yeah.
I know that they did not list Defender as one of their inspirations, but gameplay-wise, if you have played Defender before, it's going to feel incredibly familiar because a lot of the, not just the scrolling, but also the physics feel very similar to Defender.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how they managed to duplicate that without it being an inspiration. I'm willing to believe them, but it feels like a stretch to think that there wasn't at least some level of inspiration there.
Yeah. Let's talk ports.
Yeah.
Because right out of the gate, I've seen differing reports on whether the Master System or arcade version of the game released first. It seems that, at least behind the scenes, the System 16 version was made and then ported to the Master System.
Right.
And this was indicated by the fact that 2 of the bosses had to be changed due to technical limitations.
Right.
Those technical limitations of the Master System were also why they had to have blank color backgrounds during the boss fights.
Right.
But it came out on arcade and Master System in 86. It was very quickly ported to MSX and NES in 87, TurboGrafx 16 the year after that, Sharp X 68000 the year after that. It hit the Sega Saturn in 97. It was released on the Wii in 08, the 3DS port 2014, and Switch in 2019. I definitely feel like the 3DS port is the one to play.
Yeah.
The 3DS Classics version of it, even superior to M2's own Sega Ages release on Switch. The 3D Classic version of the game adds a ton. It adds the ability to play as Oopa Oopa, which is Opa's brother.
Yeah.
It adds, it's got a full manual with theoretically the canonically correct information about the game in it. It lets you get things like infinite weapon timers. You can, it adds a ton of features that makes the game more playable and enjoyable. You can add extra lives to start with, and it makes it more easily completable, I think. And also, like all the 3D classics, the 3D effect is really
impressive.
good.
Yeah,
I was always perpetually shocked about that. And we have to talk about Fantasy Zone 2 because it's even weirder than the first Fantasy Zone.
Which is saying something.
Realistically, we should call this episode Fantasy Zones because several of the Fantasy Zones are not really worth talking about separate from regular Fantasy Zone.
They're
like
just
Fantasy
so
Zone,
similar to the original,
Yeah. Fantasy Zone 2 came out, and it came out on the Master System in 1987, and then it did the reverse. It was then ported to the System E board in 88 and to the Famicom. Never had a Western release on the Famicom. Came out on the MSX, came out on the Wii in 2009. But then the weird shit happens. In 2008, M2 made the Fantasy Zone collection as part of their Sega Ages releases on the PS2. They did a whole bunch of Sega Ages. They weren't in America.
Right.
But it was Sega Ages 2500, Volume 33. Mm-hmm. And in it, they ported Fantasy Zone 2 to the System 16 that the first Fantasy Zone was on.
Yeah.
And it works. Like, you can play it in a regular arcade emulator, and like it's a real port. It's not like they just made it look like it's a full-on port.
M2 does such amazing work.
And it takes Fantasy Zone 2, which was a cool game. It added some cool ideas. Each level in Fantasy Zone 2 is comprised of 3 different levels that you're using portals to go back and forth between to destroy all the bases. Mm-hmm. And so as you destroy bases, they may or may not unlock a portal to a different section of that level.
Yeah.
And so the challenge of the game is kind of navigating this 3-layer structure, right? what M2 did with the System 16 port is they made it only 2 zones, and they called it the light zone and the dark zone. And so now it's like this good and evil side of the map. The dark zone is much harder, more difficult, sometimes has different bosses in it. And the shops are hidden. You have to like shoot the hidden spot where the shops are to get them. You don't just naturally get shops. And it's a really, really good version of Fantasy Zone 2.
Nice.
And I've always kind of thought of the Fantasy Zones 1 and 2 as kind of like Evil Dead 1 and 2. Where like they're kind of the same.
Yeah. Well, it feels almost more like a remake than a sequel.
Yeah. They're like 75% the same.
Right.
And then 15% or 25% math. Different, better, you know. The second one is definitely the better game, but it feels a lot like the first one and cribs a lot from the first one.
Yeah.
And it feels even more so on the System 16 port, but it really streamlines because the Master System version of it, going through those 3 zones gets kind of tedious, and it's easy to get lost because the background is just sort of a scrolling, similar-looking background all the way through. It really makes the game so much better. It looks so much better. It sounds so much better. It plays so much better. And this Fantasy Zone 2 DX, which is what they called it, became the basis for Fantasy Zone 2 on 3DS, the 3DS Classics version of Fantasy Zone 2, then renamed to Fantasy Zone to W, the Tears of Opa Opa. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest Fantasy Zone game ever made, bar none. It's incredible. So 2014, the 3DS Classics version comes out.
Yeah.
And it has it's got like all of the standard M2 emulation stuff, right? So you can decrease the difficulty, increase the number of lives you have. You can turn your weapon timer up to infinity. It also has banking. So when you die in the game, you get a game over, all the money you had gets banked into a bank that exists outside the game. So when you start a game, you can take some money out of your bank and start the game with cash.
That's neat.
And then when you turn on infinite weapon timers, that means now the power-ups feel more like Gradius in that when you pick them up, you just keep them until you get hurt. And so it creates this kind of like meta game, and you also unlock stuff as you play through. Like you don't start with all the emulation features unlocked. You kind of unlock them slowly. It's got different sound settings and visual settings. You can change different regions and stuff, all the standard M2 kind of emulation things you would expect. But it makes the game, like, I don't want to call it a roguelite because that's quite a stretch. But it kind of feels like that. Yeah, when you think about it. It kind of feels like it because you play through, you do a run, you die, you keep some of your money, and you use that to seed your next run. And it makes it more of a slow progress through this game, which is really difficult.
Yeah.
It kept, I didn't mention it, but it has multiple endings. It kept those from Fantasy Zone 2 DX. There are 2 different endings to the game. There's the good ending and the bad ending.
No.
And it's so much fun. It's so good. It looks so good. The 3D on it is fantastic. It runs great. And they also have a whole separate mode called Link Loop Land. And Link Loop Land is an endless mode in which you can play as Opa Opa, Oopa Oopa, or Evil Opa Opa, who Evil Opa Opa happens if you get the bad ending in the game. Evil Opa Opa is there. And so
he's got a little goatee.
The endless mode is just like it sounds. It's just an endless mode. You just play like score attack style. You get 3 different playable characters. It's so much Fantasy Zone. There's so much Fantasy Zone packed into this one fucking 3DS game. It's incredible, Saturn. It's
crammed
so good.
So much Fantasy Zone up in there.
They fit so much in there. I went back and played through the Master System version of Fantasy Zone 2. It's good. It's no Fantasy Zone 2W.
Yeah, that was the 3DS one was the only time that I ever got through the second game. And the only time I've ever gotten through the first game is in Yakuza. In the arcade in Yakuza.
It's a tough game. They're tough games. There's really kind of 2 other mainline Fantasy Zone games, and that's Fantasy Zone Gear, which is kind of
Game
just
Gear one.
Fantasy Zone on the Game Gear, except the story and the characters are different. And then there's Super Fantasy Zone, which was the Genesis version of the game, which was basically kind of a remake of Fantasy Zone 1 again, but the bosses were different but looked similar most of the time. Like,
also just kind of feels off.
It feels a little weird.
Yeah.
There's something weird about it. Like, the pumpkin boss on the first level feels kind of like Stumpalon. I don't know. He's like a plant thing, and which Stumpalon's a tree.
It's not made by Sega, and I think that kind of helps its weirdness.
It was Sunsoft.
Yeah, Sunsoft made it.
Sunsoft did that. And Ishii talked about it in I think a second interview I was reading where he was like, yeah, they did good work on it. We didn't have anything to do with it, but you know, it's kind of the oft forgotten Fantasy Zone, but it exists and like it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially if you're like, I've played the shit out of Fantasy Zone 1 and 2 and I want the same thing but different. It definitely fulfills that niche.
Yeah.
There was Fantasy Zone The Maze, which is...
it's also a Master System, right?
Yeah, that was Master System. But it's not really a Fantasy Zone game. It's like if Pac-Man was Fantasy Zone.
I'm okay with that.
So it's literally top-down mazes. You're eating dots. Enemies are showing up, and you're trying to catch power-ups to get a gun to shoot them. So like you can get a laser and then shoot them with a laser and then try to eat more dots.
That's the one that's just called Opa Opa in Japan, right?
Oh, yeah. In Japan, it was just Opa Opa.
Yeah. Because I'd played that ROM first, and assumed that was the name of the game. I don't know if I ever played the English ROM.
My issue with it is that, one, there's a spot in the middle where enemies keep coming out. It's not like Pac-Man where there's only so many ghosts. It keeps generating them, and you have to keep touching that point to stop it.
Yeah.
And your weapons are also, they don't last long at all. A lot of the levels aren't even mazes. They're just like big, wide open spaces full with a grid of dots, and it's just not very fun. There was also a year later, Galactic Protector, in which you play an Opa Opa who is attached in a circular ring around the Earth, which has a scared face on it. And you spin in this ring and shoot enemies that are flying toward the planet.
Huh.
And it's just super not fun or good, and I don't like it. And it just kind of is whatever.
Yes. It looks like that was originally designed for a paddle controller.
Yeah, it doesn't play good on a D-pad. So
yeah, maybe without a paddle, there's not a fun way to play that.
Tell me about Space Fantasy Zone. I've played it. I know of it, but I think you probably know more about it than I do.
I don't know about more, but it was canceled. First of all, it never actually made it to market.
Yeah.
It was originally authorized by Sega, but it was in development at NEC for the PC Engine CD. So Sega themselves didn't have any development, any physical development on it. They had some input. They got to approve what would or wouldn't be in there. And the gameplay is really closer to Space Harrier than it is to Fantasy Zone. It's basically Space Harrier, but in Fantasy Zone, where you control Opa Opa and you're going through Fantasy Zone stages and everything, but from the perspective of Space Harrier. And then it eventually got canceled after being marketed. Like, they had already advertised when it was coming out, when the release date was, what the price was going to be. And then they canceled it, mostly because Sega had released their Mega CD and wanted to emphasize all the development towards their own console, which is a crazy idea. But they did cancel pretty much any of the projects they had on other platforms at the time. And so it was canceled shortly before release. And of course, the prototype of it was later found many years later and uploaded to the internet. And you can go play a nearly complete prototype of it if you want to see
it's pretty fun.
Yeah, if you want to see what Fantasy Zone would be like from over the shoulder, it is a weird thing.
Yeah. There was a game. It was like late 90s. It was a 3D Harrier game. And it was, I've looked it up. I got the ROM. I tried to play it. I couldn't get it running because it was for some really wacky hardware. And I just couldn't. I was frustrated.
Was it part of the Space Harrier series?
It was part of the Space Harrier series, but it featured a playable Opa Opa.
Oh.
It was called Planet Harrier.
Oh, Planet Harriers. Yeah, yeah.
Planet Harrier. It was canceled. It kind of looked like dog shit anyway, but it did, like Space Fantasy Zone, tie Opa Opa and Space Harrier together.
Oh, Planet Harrier released.
Did it?
Yeah. It released in Japan in 2000 and North America in 2001.
Oh,
it was arcade.
I couldn't get the damn thing to play at all. Which it was for some weird arcade hardware.
Yeah, probably.
And I could not. It was like right before Naomi or something.
Yeah, it was the Hikaru hardware.
Yeah, it was like pre-Dreamcast, but late 90s 3D Sega arcade hardware, and nothing supported it.
No, it was post-Dreamcast. It was that one stupid board that they released in between Naomi and Naomi 2.
Oh, was it?
That almost nothing supported, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I couldn't get it working. I wanted to very badly, but it does kind of tie Fantasy Zone and Harrier together a little bit.
Yeah,
a little bit more than other things.
Yeah.
There were some feature phone games.
Yeah, there's a few.
If you like those. Standalone LCD handheld in 2009, which is extremely late for a standalone LCD handheld.
And it looks like an 80s LCD handheld, so it's very late.
There were some guidebooks and mini manga adaptations. I don't think anything really that's been translated in any meaningful way.
I couldn't find any that were translated myself now.
There's Fantasy Zone Ultra Super Big Maximum Great Strong Complete Album, which was the soundtrack in 2008.
Yeah.
There was a Redemption game I couldn't find much about. I had actually found 2 Redemption games that had Fantasy Zone on them. One of them I couldn't even find what it was named. I could just find a picture of it. But you found more information about this one, which was Metal to Fantasy Zone in 2012, which was like one of those
token
Redemption
games.
Game.
Yeah,
it was a token thing.
Yeah, there was also one that was just called Fantasy Zone that was Japan only. That was kind of a ticket game.
That's probably the one I couldn't find any information on.
Yeah.
That one was really tough.
I couldn't find any information that wasn't in Japanese. I only found one blurry picture of it.
Yeah. Tell us about reception for Fantasy Zone.
It was a pretty sizable hit in Japanese arcades, but it never really hit quite the same impact internationally that it did in Japan. There's a chance that it did better in Europe than it did over here in the U.S. I wasn't scouring too many European magazines about it, but here in the U.S., it kind of was mostly forgotten. The Master System version seems to average about at 80 to 90% in most reviews, both in Japan and internationally.
Yeah. The same thing for the sequel on Master System was also is like a computer video games gave it an 88.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the PC Engine version also very similar reviews. Some magazines will give it a slight edge over the Master System version, but also they were enough years apart that they were pretty comparable in score. The NES versions tend to score a bit weaker. The Tengen version is usually seen as the weaker of the two. Sunsoft's version that was Japan only is typically seen as a little more arcade accurate with smoother scrolling, but also it has really busy graphics, so it's sometimes difficult to be able to tell bullets from the background and all that kind of stuff. So it's a mixed bag on NES. Probably better off playing the Master System or PC Engine versions.
Yeah. It's one of those games that has always kind of reviewed well, but for some reason just
never made a huge impact.
Yeah, never seemed to find exactly where it wanted to be.
Yeah. And it didn't help that it was during that transitional period for Sega, because they were kind of floundering trying to find what kind of angle they could take to get their footing in the market, because they had released consoles at this point. They had but they didn't really have any way to compete with Nintendo head to head. It was always just kind of a also ran until the Mega Drive really picked up, and then they pivoted into a very different direction with stuff like Sonic eventually. So Fantasy Zone was just kind of in that era of Sega trying to discover themselves. It was the same era where they were trying to sometimes push Alex Kidd and sometimes not push Alex Kidd. So
I've seen people say that Opa Opa was kind of Sega's first mascot, and I don't know. I don't see that really.
He was somewhat of a mascot character for a little while, but I don't know that he was Sega's primary mascot at any point.
felt more like a character they'd throw a picture of on the inside of a manual for funsies,
Right,
than a true like Sonic progenitor or
No,
whatever.
I don't think he ever hit the scale that Sonic did. It was more like how Capcom had Captain Commando as their mascot for a little bit there. Like nobody really thought of him as their mascot, but they kept putting him on everything for a minute.
Yeah. As far as legacy, Fantasy Zone definitely still gets included. Like anytime Sega does a collection, they chuck Fantasy Zone in there. Anytime there's some arcade games that they want to release. The Sega Ages version of Fantasy Zone, I think, is the most recent re-release, which is a very good version of Fantasy Zone and would be the best one were it not for the 3DS version of Fantasy Zone.
Right.
And heartbreakingly, Fantasy Zone 2W, The Tears of Opa Opa, does not exist outside of the 3DS. There was never a Sega Ages version of the game. The closest you can get is playing the Fantasy Zone 2 DX System 16 port. The ROM from that PS2 collection does exist, and you can scoop it up.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to play, but it misses all of the cool features and extra modes that the 3DS version has. So
and that is unfortunately locked to the 3DS, a system that you can no longer buy digital games for.
Yep.
So it's frustrating.
Also, Fantasy Zone 2W does not emulate well in Citra.
That's unfortunate.
It has got problems. So it's just kind of one of those games where you either own a 3DS and you play it, or you don't and you can't, and it's so frustrating because it's just an outstanding representation of Fantasy Zone.
Yeah, we can hope that the emulation gets better, so that more people can enjoy it.
Yeah. Opa Opa still appears in a lot of things, makes a lot of guest appearances. Like, Sega hasn't forgotten that Fantasy Zone exists. They don't seem interested in making anything in that space anymore, and seemed to kind of lose interest pretty quickly to begin with.
Right.
We got Fantasy Zone 1 and 2, and those are really the only two numbered mainline Fantasy Zone games.
Yeah.
Everything else has kind of been like a spin-off or a port or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's all Space Fantasy Zone was probably the closest we would have gotten to a real third Fantasy Zone, I imagine. And even then it was just kind of hairier, but
it was just with Space
Opa
Harrier.
Opa.
Yeah.
So it's kind of disappointing.
And even then it wasn't even developed internally by Sega.
I feel like this got sad, so let's talk final thoughts and get happy.
Super Fantasy Zone on Genesis kind of felt like a successor as well.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it felt more like it always feels like a remake to me. Like it's different. It's like alternate universe. Like it is a sequel. But I don't know what it is about it. I think it's that it doesn't do the Fantasy Zone 2 stuff.
Yeah.
Like Fantasy Zone 2 moved the gameplay forward, and Super Fantasy Zone was like, yeah, but what if we didn't? And it was just you shoot guys again, and that's it. And it's kind of sad because of that. Yeah. As far as final thoughts, Fantasy Zone 2W is one of my favorite games. The modern ports of Fantasy Zone have made it one of my favorite games. It's one of my favorite shmups. It's one of my favorite soundtracks, one of my favorite games to look at. I'm constantly frustrated that they won't make the best versions of the game available because they don't use the dual screen. You can just fucking port it. You can just port it, Sega.
You got to wait 20 years first.
Fine. I love it. I have a lot of love for Fantasy Zone. I think they're great games. Pick up the Sega Ages version. It's still really good. It doesn't have as many features, but if you want to get a legit version, it's still a very good version of the game. Or just pirate the 3DS version, because if you don't own what you buy, then you can't be stealing what you pirate, right? Like that's just kind of how it works. If you've never played a Fantasy Zone, there's a lot of them. Definitely playing one of the modern ports.
And they're really pick up and play too.
They are.
All of them are very approachable as far as a shmup goes. They're very approachable. A lot of people I know are intimidated by shmups as a genre because of how difficult a lot of them are and how memorization based a lot of them are. And Fantasy Zone really isn't. It's much more forgiving in that regard. Being able to buy your own power-ups in whatever order you want just makes it a much more approachable game. Also, it's adorable. And Opa Opa is adorable, and the music is adorable. And if only we had some venue to talk more about Opa Opa.
If only. Thank you for teeing me up. Fantasy Zone aficionados might notice that we haven't talked a lot about Opa Opa and the kind of weird mythos of the Fantasy Zone games and story that goes along with it. And that's because we're saving it for next episode.
Yay!
We don't normally tease topics except for when they're two parties. And really, we're kind of doing
kind
this
of
like
a
we do
two-parter.
RPGs, where we're like, hey, this is the gameplay, these are the games. Next episode is all
The
Fantasy
batshit
Zone
story.
mythos.
Yeah.
That's it.
Uh-huh.
That's all it's going to be is Opa end to end. So prepare yourself for that.
Opa End to End is also the name of my colonoscopy Fantasy Zone side story.
I don't normally make promises about future episodes, but I can promise it's going to get real fucking weird. That's that much I can promise.
Yeah.
I think it will definitely happen.
Yeah.
And if you like weird things, check out our Patreon. At
We do some weird shit.
Patreon.com/RetroWarriors, where you can listen to episode 167 of Talking Wizards entitled Gorge of the Bunghole. Which is the porn version of George of the Jungle.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, see, now you get it.
Yeah, no one can get it. It's better if people don't get it, honestly.
And for everyone, I'll tease the upcoming episode is going to be entitled Willie B. Winker. We've already got that set in stone. It's in the can. It's in editing. So if you want to hear a weird show, we have Talking Wizards. You can hear uncut versions of this show where we talk about mostly non-video game stuff. But
that's a safe way to phrase it.
If you want to hear us just be old men for a while,
or inappropriate,
or inappropriate, or make jokes we can't make on air, then there you go. You
we
can
choose
go listen.
not to make on air.
You can go listen to those. And you can also get our eternal thanks, like the following patrons, starting with Chris Forbes
and Mayo Man X,
Joystick Cowboy,
Captain Koloth,
Epic Da Vinci,
David Cavallari,
David Nethery, Dan
Christensen,
Dean Schmidt,
and Jerry Vaz.
All gave us money, and we thank them for the money they gave us. It was very nice. We spent it on penny whistles and moon pies.
And we thank them if they continue to give us money in the future.
Yeah, we thank you. Also, if you forget that you were subscribed and go, oh shit, I meant to unsubscribe, and then we get another $4, we're also still thankful for that.
Yeah,
even though
always
it was unintentional.
For unintentional $4.
Just for those accidental $4. Anyway, we'll be back next week with episode 500, our 500th episode. It's going to be very exciting. Technically not. I think one of our episodes we did like 100, I think was 100 and like 100.1 or something. So just numerically it's not, but it is.
Our 500-minute, 500 episode special.
No, don't promise 500 minutes. I mean, there's so many hours, Saturn. Don't do that. Why would you say that?
500-hour special.
Oh my God. Anyway, next week is episode 500. If you're listening to the uncuts, you get it right now. You can go listen to this one and then listen to that one because we release them together at the same time. Right. Because we record them together at the same time.
That's true.
And I want to get them, pass the savings on to you.
Yay.
Anyway, before I get any weirder, I think we should stop.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Don't
for
worry,
listening.
we'll have plenty of weird next episode.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. And as always, let us cling together.